What if the most dangerous thing in the Gulf was not a missile, not a warship, but a machine so small and strange that nobody noticed it until the sky lit up? And what if the moment the United States finally understood what Iran had built, the answer came fast enough to change the balance of fear overnight? If you want sharp breakdowns without the boring parts, tap like, subscribe, and share this video with one friend who loves military stories with real stakes. Because this was not just another standoff in the Middle East. This felt like a test of who could hide better, think faster, and strike first. On one side was Iran, leaning on secrecy, geography, and hidden systems. On the other side was the United States, with layers of surveillance, stealth aircraft, and a habit of turning a small discovery into a very large message. And somewhere between them sat one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth, where one bad decision can shake oil markets, shipping routes, insurance rates, and governments far away. The title of this story sounds almost unbelievable. Aerobots. It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like one of those words people throw around online to make ordinary drones sound magical. But that is exactly why it matters. In modern conflict, the side that names the system often shapes how people imagine it. And if reports of Iranian airborne robotic platforms, sensor relays, or drone-linked attack networks are even partly accurate, then the bigger point is not the label. The bigger point is what those systems were trying to do: extend Iran's eyes, stretch Iran's reach, and create a moving wall of uncertainty over sea lanes that the whole world depends on. For years, Iran has invested in tools that do not need to beat the United States in a straight fight. That was never the goal. The goal was to complicate the fight, to flood the map, to create so many threats, decoys, launch points, and hidden angles that a stronger enemy starts wasting time and attention. Fast boats, coastal missiles, tunnels, mines, drones, mobile radar, proxy launch cells, all of it points to the same idea. If you cannot dominate the battlefield, you can still make the battlefield feel dangerous, crowded, and expensive. Now place that strategy inside the narrow geometry of the Strait of Hormuz. That is where the story becomes serious. This is not some remote patch of water that only military planners care about. A huge share of the world's energy traffic moves through that corridor. Tankers pass through a zone where every radar hit, every unidentified craft, every electronic signal, and every rumored mine can trigger fear far beyond the region. Traders react, insurers react, shipping companies react, and when they react, ordinary people feel it later at the gas pump, in shipping costs, and across food and transport prices. That is why even a limited clash there never stays local for long. So what were these so-called Aerobots supposed to be doing? The most likely answer is not a single miracle weapon, but a layered system. Imagine small drones acting like spotters, others working as communication relays, some flying low and hard to track, others hovering far enough back to feed data into a larger network. Pair that with coastal sensors, patrol boats, underground storage, and radar. Suddenly you do not just have drones, you have a web. And webs are dangerous because they do not need every strand to hold. They only need enough strands to slow you down while the real threat moves into place. That is what makes this story gripping. If the United States detected such a network in real time, then the issue was not simply Iran has drones. Everyone already knows Iran has drones. The issue was whether Iran had found a new way to blend air, sea, and electronic pressure into a single operating picture. In plain English, could Iran watch the water, threaten the water, and confuse the response all at once? If the answer was yes, even for a short window, then every American commander in the region would have treated that as a problem that could grow very quickly. And here is where the tension sharpens. The hidden network is most dangerous in the moments before the other side proves it can see through it. Iran's advantage depends on uncertainty. The United States' advantage depends on stripping that uncertainty away. That contest is the real heartbeat of this entire story. Not just firepower, awareness, not just weapons, timing. The side that sees the pattern first usually controls what happens next. Reports and commentary around this kind of event often jump straight to explosions. But the real battle starts long before the first shot. It begins with signals, heat signatures, acoustic clues, movement patterns, a launch that happens at the wrong hour, a support vessel that stops in the wrong place for too long, a drone flight path that looks random until software compares it with 5 others and finds the logic hiding underneath. Modern military power is not only about who has the biggest bomb, it is also about who can turn noise into meaning faster than everyone else. If American systems picked up evidence that Iranian platforms were queuing mines, guiding small attack craft, or building a forward drone screen over the Gulf, then the discovery alone would have been a strategic event. Why? Because it would suggest preparation, not theater. It would suggest somebody was not just trying to look defiant for domestic politics. Somebody was building options. And options in that region are dangerous because they can shift from signaling to action before diplomats even finish their statements. That is why the F-35 and the F-18 matter so much in this story. They are not just famous jets people recognize from headlines and video games. They represent 2 different strengths that can become devastating when used together. The F-35 is about seeing, sharing, and slipping through defended spaces with a level of awareness that older aircraft were never designed to match. The FA-18 Super Hornet is about flexibility, endurance, and carrying the tools needed for a hard strike package at sea. Add the electronic warfare power of support aircraft like the Growler, and you get something more than a patrol. You get a system built to peel apart a defended network. Think about what that means from Iran's side. You hide assets in tunnels, coastal sites, improvise docks, and shallow inlets. You move equipment under civilian-looking patterns. You rely on clutter. You bet that geography protects you. Then suddenly an aircraft you can barely track is collecting, fusing, and passing targeting data faster than your operators can make sense of the air picture. Another aircraft can release standoff weapons outside the most dangerous envelope. Electronic attack platforms can jam, distort, or overload what your radar crews think they are seeing. In that moment, the battlefield stops feeling like home ground. It starts feeling transparent. And that is one of the cruel truths of modern war. Technology does not just destroy objects. It destroys confidence. A hidden boat can be replaced. A damaged pier can be rebuilt. But once crews begin to believe that every emission gives away their position, every launch is tracked, and every defensive radar can become a beacon for incoming fire, the entire psychology of resistance changes. Fear spreads faster than wreckage. Now, to be clear, public claims around these incidents are often mixed with exaggeration, propaganda, and rumor. That is the nature of regional crisis reporting. One side wants to sound invincible. The other wants to sound restrained but dominant. Online commentators take fragments and turn them into certainty, so we should be careful about exact details. But even with that caution, the broad logic holds. If the United States believed Iran was constructing a drone-linked maritime kill chain, the response would not be random. It would be designed to blind, isolate, and punish the key nodes that made the network useful. That begins with detection and classification. Which drones are relays, which are bait, which boats are loaded for attack, and which are just meant to create confusion. Which radar is searching, and which radar is waiting silently for the right moment. A good strike plan does not waste expensive weapons on every suspicious dot. It maps priority. It cuts the web where the tension is highest. So when people ask, what did the F-35 and F-18 do, the answer is bigger than one dramatic maneuver. They likely formed part of a chain of actions. Find the pattern, confirm the pattern, disrupt the sensors, threaten the shooters, hit the launch infrastructure. Send a message that whatever hidden advantage Iran believed it had just been erased. In that sense, the jets were not simply attacking targets. They were attacking the idea that Iran could quietly control escalation in that space. And if that happened, it would explain why the response would feel so sudden. Once a network like that is exposed, delay becomes risky. Every extra hour gives the other side time to move assets, spread disinformation, or create a provocation on its own terms. Speed becomes part of deterrence. You do not merely punish capability. You show that capability can be found and countered quickly. Let me pause for a second. If this breakdown is keeping the picture clear while everyone else makes it noisy, hit subscribe, leave a like, and send this video to the person who always asks, okay, but what does that actually mean? There's another layer here that many people miss. Iran's strategy is not only military, it is psychological and economic. You do not need to sink a tanker to create panic. You only need markets to believe that someone could. You do not need to shut the Strait of Hormuz for months. You only need enough risk to raise prices, reroute ships, and inject doubt into governments already stretched by other crises. In that kind of environment, even an experimental drone network can have value far beyond its raw battlefield performance. It can function like a lever placed under the global economy. That is why the American response, if it was as sharp as described, would have carried two audiences. The first audience was Iran. The second was everybody else watching the shipping map. Washington would want Tehran to understand that covert buildup can be seen and hit. At the same time, Washington would want markets, allies, and regional partners to believe that escalation can be contained before it becomes a full maritime emergency. Military action in such a moment is not only about damage, it is also about reassurance. But reassurance has limits. Every time the United States demonstrates reach, Iran learns something too. It learns which assets were vulnerable. It learns what emissions may have betrayed its positions. It learns how quickly its systems were penetrated. Conflict is a brutal teacher. Even a failed tactic can produce the next workaround. That is why these exchanges are rarely final. They are rounds in an argument that keeps evolving. And Iran has shown for years that it adapts. When one route becomes too visible, it uses another. When large platforms are exposed, it leans on smaller ones. When direct confrontation becomes too risky, it shifts toward deniability. That is where the idea of Aerobots becomes especially interesting. Not because it sounds futuristic, but because it fits Iran's pattern of searching for cheaper ways to multiply pressure. A swarm of lower-cost airborne platforms, linked to local operators and maritime units, can create headaches far out of proportion to their price. From the American side, that means the challenge is not just defeating one threat, it is staying ahead of combinations. A drone by itself is manageable. A mine by itself is dangerous but familiar. A fast boat swarm by itself can be planned for. But when sensors, mines, drones, coastal launchers, and propaganda all work together, the problem becomes much more serious. Complexity becomes the weapon. This is why aircraft like the F-35 matter beyond their stealth profile. Their real value is the way they shrink confusion. They gather from different sensors, compare, filter, and present something closer to a usable truth. In a crowded battle space, that can be worth more than raw speed. The F-35 helps turn a blur into a map. And once you have a map, aircraft like the Super Hornet can exploit it with disciplined, flexible firepower. One sees the shape, the other helps break it. Support aircraft matter too. Electronic warfare is often described in abstract terms, but at its core, it is very human. It creates doubt in enemy crews. It makes operators question their screens, their timing, even their instincts. Are those returns real? Is that gap accidental? Did we lose the track, or were we deceived? A radar operator who hesitates for 3 seconds during a strike can lose everything. That is why jamming and deception are not side acts. They are central acts. Now imagine being inside an Iranian command room during such an operation. Reports are coming in from different sectors. Maybe a drone feed drops. Maybe a boat crew stops responding. Maybe a radar picture fills with clutter at the exact moment a senior commander wants certainty. Then word comes that aircraft you cannot reliably pin down are already closer than expected. This is how local confidence turns into strategic panic. Not all at once, but in layers. And this is where many dramatic videos online get one thing right, even when they get details wrong. The real spectacle is not the explosion. It is the collapse of control. The feeling that the side trying to manage escalation has suddenly lost the script. The moment when a hidden move becomes visible, and visibility becomes vulnerability. That is what makes stories like this spread so fast. People are not only reacting to force, they are reacting to the reversal. There is also a political story running underneath all of this. Iranian leaders must project strength abroad while managing pressure at home. American leaders must project firmness without getting trapped in another open-ended regional conflict. Allies want protection, but fear escalation. Energy markets want stability, but trade on fear. Everyone is signaling. Everyone is calculating. Everyone is pretending to know where the red lines are, even when those lines keep moving in the dark. So if an Iranian drone and sensor architecture was exposed and then answered by a US air package, the event would sit at the center of all those pressures. It would be military, political, economic, and symbolic at the same time. Tehran would need to prove it can absorb a hit without looking helpless. Washington would need to prove it can act without losing control of the bigger board. And outside powers would watch closely, because every exchange in the Gulf whispers something about future crises elsewhere. Here is the part that should really hold your attention. The future of deterrence may depend less on giant signature weapons and more on who can build resilient networks faster. The next serious confrontation may not begin with an obvious missile salvo. It may begin with data relays, autonomous scouts, disposable drones, spoofed signatures, and support vessels that look harmless until they do not. In that world, the line between surveillance and attack becomes thin. Discovery itself can become a trigger. That means the phrase, "the US discovered Iran's Aerobots," carries more weight than it first seems. Discovery means somebody's hidden layer is no longer hidden. It means planning has been interrupted. It means surprise is leaking away. And when surprise leaks away in a tense region, one side often rushes to restore initiative while the other rushes to prove it still has options. That is how dangerous windows open. Quick reset before we go deeper. If you enjoy videos that turn complex geopolitics into something you can actually follow, press like, subscribe for the next upload, and share this one before the algorithm buries it under empty shouting. Now let us talk about why this matters beyond one clash. The Gulf is a laboratory for modern pressure tactics. What happens there is watched in Europe, in Asia, in every capital that depends on secure sea lanes, and in every military that expects future wars to blend drones, sensors, cyber effects, and precision strike. If Iran is experimenting with denser drone-enabled coastal networks, other states are studying the results. If the United States is refining ways to crack those networks quickly, other states are studying that too. This is how local encounters become global lessons. A successful detection method in the Gulf may show up in the Pacific. A jamming technique proven over one set of waters may be adapted for another theater. A doctrine built around low-cost unmanned platforms in one crisis may appear in a very different conflict a year later. The details travel. Militaries learn from each other even when they are enemies. It also matters because the myth of invulnerability is one of the most expensive myths any government can believe. Iran sometimes benefits from appearing unpredictable enough to deter intervention. The United States sometimes benefits from appearing capable enough to dominate any exchange. Both images contain some truth, and both can become traps. Overconfidence causes miscalculation. If Iran believed a distributed network of drones and maritime assets could shield escalation, that confidence could invite a response it was not ready to absorb. If the United States believed technical superiority alone solved the political problem, that confidence could invite a different kind of entanglement later. That is why the smartest reading of this story is not one side is unstoppable. The smartest reading is that the battlefield is changing fast, and the side that adapts quickest in the first hours gains an outsized advantage. Sometimes that advantage is enough to restore deterrence. Sometimes it only sets up the next round. History gives us both outcomes, and we should not ignore the human layer beneath the machines. Behind every drone feed is an operator. Behind every radar screen is a crew. Behind every launch order is a chain of judgment, fear, ego, and pressure. Technology can make action faster, but it does not remove human weakness. People still misread signals. They still convince themselves that the enemy will wait. They still assume the other side wants the same off-ramp. Many disasters begin there. Imagine a young sailor on a commercial vessel hearing rumors that the water ahead may be unsafe. Imagine insurance managers recalculating risk within minutes. Imagine families in the region watching social media explode with conflicting claims. This is what strategic competition looks like in real life. It is not just maps and hardware. It is tension entering ordinary lives through uncertainty. And if you are wondering why people react so strongly to the mention of the F-35 in these stories, it is because the aircraft symbolizes a larger shift. People see stealth, but what scares opponents more is coordinated awareness. The jet is part sensor, part shooter, part quarterback. It helps pull scattered information into a shared picture. In conflicts defined by clutter and deception, that role becomes terrifying. It means the hiding place may already be compromised before the target realizes the search has started. The Super Hornet adds a different kind of menace. It is the workhorse of carrier power. It shows up, stays useful, carries varied weapons, and turns intelligence into practical action. If the F-35 is the quiet mind of the operation, the F-18 is often the hard fist that follows. Together they send a clear message. If you build a network to threaten the sea can send back a network of its own. And that brings us to the emotional core of the story. Iran's whole style of deterrence is built on the belief that pressure can be spread, hidden, and managed in ways stronger powers find costly to unravel. America's reply, when it chooses to make one, is to show that hidden pressure is not invisible pressure. That is a brutal argument, because both sides are really talking about control. Who controls the tempo? Who controls the fear? Who controls the moment when uncertainty turns into action? When viewers hear the F-35 and F-18 did this, they expect a cinematic strike. And maybe there was one. But the deeper answer is more powerful. They exposed a method. They interrupted a plan. They reminded everyone in the region that clever systems are still vulnerable when the other side can see the chain instead of only the pieces. That matters more than one crater. It changes behavior, and behavior is everything in deterrence. If commanders become more cautious about emitting, moving, loading, or clustering assets, the response has already done part of its job. If regional partners feel more confident keeping trade moving, the response has done another part. If markets calm because they believe the threat was real but manageable, that is another effect. Again, military action radiates outward. The explosion is only the center ring. We are close to the heart of it now, so here is my final ask. If this video gave you a clearer view than the panic posts and the recycled headlines, like it, subscribe, and share it somewhere people still care about facts, patterns, and what power really looks like. Because in the end, this story is not just about Iran. It is about the future of conflict in crowded spaces. Hidden sensors, cheap drones, narrow waterways, expensive consequences. It is about how a regional power tries to weaponize ambiguity, and how a global power tries to destroy that ambiguity before it spreads. It is about the terrifying speed at which modern detection can erase modern deception. And it is also a warning. The next crisis may arrive wearing the face of something small, deniable, and easy to dismiss. Not a giant fleet, not a mass invasion, a cluster of machines, a relay chain, a few unexplained signals, a commercial route suddenly wrapped in risk. By the time the public understands the pattern, military planners may already be deciding whether to break it with force. That is why the discovery of so-called Aerobots matters, even if the exact label changes tomorrow. The label is not the story is the network. The story is the attempt to fuse unmanned systems, maritime geography, and political timing into leverage over one of the world's most sensitive choke points. And the story is what happens when that leverage gets noticed by an opponent with stealth aircraft, electronic warfare, and very little patience for surprises in the Gulf. If the reports are even half right, then the message from the skies was simple. You can hide in clutter, you can disguise intent, you can spread assets across boats, coves, sensors, and tunnels. But if your system leaves a pattern, that pattern can be found. And once it is found, speed, precision, and coordination can turn your secret advantage into your biggest weakness. That is why this moment feels bigger than a headline. It shows how wars of the future may begin in fragments and then snap into focus all at once. A drone here, a signal there, a scramble, a strike, a denial, a market reaction, a wave of fear, then a new reality. In that kind of world, the side that sees first does not just win information, it wins initiative. And if you remember only one thing from this video, remember this: the scariest weapon is not always the one that explodes the loudest. Sometimes it is the system that quietly connects everything. And the most decisive counterattack is not always the one that destroys the most. Sometimes it is the one that proves the hidden system was never truly hidden at all. Script data. What if the most dangerous thing in the Gulf was not a missile, not a warship, but a machine so small and strange that nobody noticed it until the sky lit up? And what if the moment the United States finally understood what Iran had built, the answer came fast enough to change the balance of fear overnight? If you want sharp breakdowns without the boring parts, tap like, subscribe, and share this video with one friend who loves military stories with real stakes. Because this was not just another standoff in the Middle East. This felt like a test of who could hide better, think faster, and strike first. On one side was Iran, leaning on secrecy, geography, and hidden systems. On the other side was the United States, with layers of surveillance, stealth aircraft, and a habit of turning a small discovery into a very large message. And somewhere between them sat one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth, where one bad decision can shake oil markets, shipping routes, insurance rates, and governments far away. The title of this story sounds almost unbelievable. Aerobots. It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like one of those words people throw around online to make ordinary drones sound magical. But that is exactly why it matters. In modern conflict, the side that names the system often shapes how people imagine it. And if reports of Iranian airborne robotic platforms, sensor relays, or drone-linked attack networks are even partly accurate, then the bigger point is not the label. The bigger point is what those systems were trying to do: extend Iran's eyes, stretch Iran's reach, and create a moving wall of uncertainty over sea lanes that the whole world depends on. For years, Iran has invested in tools that do not need to beat the United States in a straight fight. That was never the goal.